Hi! Today I am finally making a miniature chicken. And I say finally because it has been on my to-do list for such a long time. So I've decided to make the main part of my chicken out of clay, and I have this air dry clay which has been sat in my cupboard for over a year. The last time I used this clay, I think, was to make my chimney pots on the roof of my doll's house, which was one of my very first projects. So I wrapped it in tin foil and put it in an airtight container, and I've had it in the cupboard. I wrapped it in tin foil because I was hoping that would keep the air out even more and help to preserve it. And as I was opening it now, I wasn't sure if it was still going to be usable or if it would have gone hard. When I opened it, I found that some sort of reaction had happened with the foil, so the foil seemed to have kind of disintegrated. But happily, when I opened it up, the clay was just as soft as when I first got it. So this was absolutely usable, and I couldn't wait to get started. I've got two pieces here just because this was the original full block and the other bit was a bit that I'd cut off. And that bit was perfect too. Even though storing it like this has worked, I did decide to discard the foil and just pop it into the container. I'm hoping that this box is airtight enough to keep it nice and pristine for future uses, but as you can see, the foil had completely disintegrated, so I decided that probably wasn't the best way to store it. So I got rid of that foil, cleaned my tray, and started working on my little miniature chicken. Now I've got to admit that I didn't really measure what size this chicken would be, I just guessed. So my doll's house is 12th scale, but a lot of the items in my doll's house I have just guessed. Some of the things I've measured, but then when I've measured and worked out the measurements, when I've made them, I haven't liked how they've looked, and I've ended up changing them anyway, so I tend to do things just by looking and estimating and having a nice sensible guess. I'd love to know how people watching the videos make miniatures themselves. Do you do it really accurately, or do you just have a go and hope for the best? I'm definitely a just have a go and hope for the best kind of crafter. So I've decided to do my chicken in a sitting down position because I don't want to make some little legs that are so thin that they'll break when I try to stand it up. As I was working with this clay, it was starting to dry out a little bit. I've recently been using polymer clay rather than air dry clay, and I think I've got used to being able to work with it quite a lot without it drying out quite so much. After making the shape of my chicken, I then had to make its little crest to go on its head. So I just flattened out a ball of clay and then used one of my tools that I normally use with my polymer clay to make the shape. And I used a finer tool here just to really try and refine the edges there because it was particularly small and thin. Now attaching this to the top of the chicken's head proved quite difficult. Every time I tried to attach it, it fell back off. And I think one of the reasons was because the clay was so dry. So I decided to get some water because, as you'll see, every time I thought I'd got it in place, it came off again. And I thought maybe some water would just help it to stick a little bit better. And thankfully that worked. Now I wasn't too worried about the cracks that were showing in some parts of this chicken because I was planning on covering it so that it'd be covered in feathers. But the actual face of the chicken probably won't be covered, so that bit is probably quite important. So I had looked at my chicken and thought it looked a little bit too big, so I started to remove some of this clay. I instantly regretted trying to remove the clay though, because it kind of lost its nice shape. So I ended up in a situation where I didn't know whether to try and backtrack and stick the bit back on that I'd just pulled off, or whether to just go for it and then try and reshape the chicken. I made the decision to just go for it and keep removing some of the clay, because actually the chicken was looking a little bit too big and I didn't want a giant chicken in my kitchen of my doll's house. By the way, this chicken is going into the kitchen. Probably not a great place for a chicken to live, but I like the thought that it's wandered in from outside and made itself at home. So I used some water to smooth out the clay, and I added a teeny tiny little beak. You will notice later on in the video that this little beak has gone missing, and that's because I knocked it off at some point and I lost it because it was so small. So once I was happy with the size and shape of my chicken, I left it to dry, and I left it to dry overnight, and this is what it looked like in the morning. So it was time to start thinking about how to add feathers. I decided that I didn't want to use real feathers, so I needed to add something that would look nice and realistic. So I decided, on the recommendation of some of my subscribers on YouTube and on Instagram, to try using cotton wool, because hopefully this would make a nice fibrous texture, but that wouldn't be too obvious like needle felting wool, which can sometimes be quite thick and wiry. So I started by diluting some PVA glue with water. As you can see, I poured out far too much PVA glue because the funnel inside the lid had actually got stuck inside the lid instead of being attached to the bottle. And I coated my clay chicken with the diluted PVA glue. I then took little pieces of cotton wool and attached it to the PVA glue mixture. My cat has just arrived, so if you start hearing her purring, she's just come to say hello. She hasn't been for a while actually, whilst I've been recording my narration on my videos. So I almost completely covered the little chicken in cotton wool. I did leave the bottom of it because I wanted to make sure that remained flat so that it stood up straight, and I did leave the area around the head of the chicken. I used my paintbrush to try and mould the cotton wool into a shape where the wings would be, and you'll notice that the little crest fell off again, so I stuck that back on, and at this point it doesn't have its beak either. It was very fiddly trying to stick this back on. Had to balance it on the chicken's head. When I was happy with its position, I also needed to think about the beak. So rather than using clay this time, I decided to take a piece of card and I folded it in half and attached it this way. I haven't attached it just yet actually, it's a little bit later on. So I did first decide to colour the feathers, and I decided to use this liquid watercolour paint. It's more like ink. If you've watched previous videos, you will have seen me spill some of the green one of this on a nice cream chair. And you will have also seen me use it on my miniature owl when I didn't test the colours and painted the owl and ended up with a bright orange owl. So this time I decided to test the colours on a spare piece of cotton wool first. So this was quite a dark colour, so I decided to try out one of the lighter ones as well for comparison. And I actually liked both of the colours for a chicken. Obviously, the feathers on chickens, the colours vary, so I didn't feel like I could get it too wrong. So I decided to start with the lighter colour, and at this point the cotton wool was still wet with the diluted PVA glue mixture, and it meant that it was easy to apply this ink without using much because it spread out nicely. It kind of absorbed into the mixture. Once I'd covered it in the lighter colour, I then used some of the darker colour for some of the tips of the feathers. And I also thought carefully about how to define the shape of the wings using the darker colour. And I didn't leave it looking just as obvious as that. I did blend it in a little bit more. I was really happy at this point with the colour that the chicken was looking. And now it was time to add the beak. And the beak needed to be teeny, teeny, tiny, even smaller than that. So I glued that on and left it to dry, and I went out into my garden and collected some poppy seeds because I thought they would be just the right size for eyes. Now I am hoping that these poppy seeds don't start growing in the cotton wool. You know, like that experiment that you can do where you put cress seed on cotton wool and it starts to grow. I'm hoping that that's not going to happen here. So I dipped the poppy seed into the PVA glue and just popped it onto the little chicken using my paintbrush, and then I repositioned it using my tweezers. And then I did the same on the other side. I actually can't believe that the huge poppies grow from these teeny tiny seeds. And that's how my little chicken was looking, and I was really happy with her so far. I did add some yellow paint to the little beak once it was dry, and it didn't take much at all because obviously it's so tiny. And then it was time for her to dry, and it was such a warm day that I decided to just pop her on top of here and take her out into the garden so that she could be in the sunshine drying. And the day later, when she was nice and dry, this is how she looked. And I'm so pleased with how the feathers turned out. Now, the colours I think have dried brighter again, just like the owl, so I maybe need to learn from that because she is quite bright. But anyway, in these bags I have loads of items from dolls' houses because I've got a couple more dolls' houses that I need to start working on, and they came with lots of furniture in them. Inside these bags somewhere are some miniature eggs, and I would like to put them with my chicken. So I did think it might take quite a while to find them amongst everything, but actually I then spotted them sat right in the corner of the bag. And when I took them out of the bag, I noticed that one of the eggs was a little bit damaged. In fact, two of them are, and it looks as if maybe some eggs are missing. So I did have a look in the bottom of the bag to see if any of the eggs had come out and were rolling around, but I couldn't see them anywhere. Never mind. So now it was time to put my little hen and the eggs into my doll's house kitchen. quite sure where I should put the eggs and the chicken. So I started off with the eggs up on the table like this, and I thought maybe she could be looking up at them. But then I thought actually she's obviously not got any legs because she's meant to be sat down. So I think it needs to be more obvious that she's in a sitting down position. So I left her there for a second and I went away and I found some moss that was left over from when I made my carrot tops. And I decided to make a little nest, little bed for her to sit on. Now at the moment I have just put the eggs on the floor next to her, but I'd love to hear your opinions on where you think she should sit and where the eggs should sit. I've really loved making my miniature chicken. I can't believe it's taken me so long actually, because it has been on my list for a very long time. I decided to move my lady of the house downstairs. She's been upstairs for a little while, so she can be in the kitchen with the chicken. Oh, the chicken needs a name, doesn't it? Leave some suggestions in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.